The Wild West. Just hearing those words probably brings the same images to mind. Cowboys, outlaws, dusty streets, and a gunfight waiting around every corner. Maybe you picture a lone rider crossing an empty desert, or a saloon door swinging open before a fight. These images feel so familiar that they seem like real memories. For over 100 years, movies have taught us exactly what the Wild West looked like. Fast guns, fearless sheriffs, danger around every corner. Generation after generation grew up watching the same story, the same heroes, the same villains, told again and again until it stopped feeling like fiction. It's one of the most famous stories in history. There's just one problem. Most of it never actually happened. Hollywood didn't just exaggerate the Wild West, it completely reinvented it. Real events were rewritten, real people were turned into characters, and slowly, fiction replaced fact. The real frontier wasn't built by famous gunfighters. It was built by ordinary people, trying to survive. The truth is, most cowboys never fought a duel. Most outlaws never became rich. And many frontier towns were surprisingly peaceful. So, why does everyone believe the myths? Because the legend is simply more exciting than reality. But today, we're separating fiction from history. Because once you discover what the Wild West was really like, you'll never watch another Western the same way again. Let's begin with perhaps the biggest myth of them all. The Wild West was a place where everyone solved problems with a gun. According to Hollywood, every disagreement in the Wild West ended the same way. Two men, one dusty street, hands hovering over their revolvers, waiting to see who could draw first. It's one of the most recognizable scenes in movie history, but surprisingly, it almost never happened. Real gunfights were incredibly dangerous. Even experienced gunmen knew that once bullets started flying, there was a good chance nobody would walk away. Most people didn't want a duel. They wanted to go home alive. Avoiding a fight was often the smartest decision. In fact, many famous frontier towns had surprisingly strict gun laws. Visitors were often required to hand over their weapons before entering town. Places like Dodge City and Tombstone weren't trying to encourage shootouts. They were trying to prevent them. Of course, violence did happen, but it was the exception, not the rule. Hollywood remembered the rare shootouts because they made great stories. History remembers them because they were rare. So if cowboys weren't spending every day fighting, what were they actually doing? The answer was far less glamorous and far more exhausting. Despite what the movies suggest, cowboys weren't hired to chase criminals. Their real job was moving cattle across thousands of miles of open land. Sometimes the journey lasted for months. A typical day started before sunrise. There were no weekends, no vacations, just long hours in the saddle, from dawn until dark. Most of the time, nothing exciting happened, and that was exactly how they wanted it. A calm herd meant everyone stayed alive, but even a peaceful cattle drive could turn deadly in seconds, not because of outlaws, but because of the cattle themselves. A single loud noise, a lightning strike, or even one frightened animal could trigger a stampede involving thousands of cattle. Stopping a stampede was one of the most dangerous jobs a cowboy could face. Many were injured. Some never made it home. And after all that hard work, how much did a cowboy earn? Far less than most people imagine. Most cowboys earned between $25 and $40 per month. Not exactly the fortune Hollywood likes to imagine. Their clothes weren't designed to look impressive. Every piece had a purpose. Wide hats blocked the sun. Leather chaps protected their legs. Boots kept their feet secure in the stirrups. The cowboy wasn't a fearless gunslinger. He was something much simpler, a ranch worker doing one of the hardest jobs in America. But if cowboys weren't the most dangerous people in the Wild West, then who was? Hollywood would have you believe it was the outlaws, men who robbed banks, stole horses, and vanished into the desert before anyone could catch them. Movies make it seem like every outlaw became rich. Every robbery was successful. Every escape was legendary. But real life was much less glamorous. Most outlaws spent their lives running, sleeping outdoors, constantly moving, never knowing if tomorrow would be their last day. And despite what Hollywood shows, Banks weren't always the favorite target. There was something far easier to rob. Stagecoaches, and later railroads, often carried cash, gold, and valuable cargo across hundreds of miles, making them far more attractive targets. Even then, successful robberies were far less common than the movies suggest. Many criminals were caught. Others simply disappeared into history. One name, however, became larger than all the others. Billy the Kid, a name almost everyone recognizes, but not for the reasons you might think. Newspapers transformed him into a legend. Every article added another layer to the story. By the time Hollywood arrived, the myth had already taken on a life of its own. In reality, many famous outlaws lived short lives, constantly hunted, constantly hiding, always looking over their shoulder. The Wild West wasn't filled with fearless criminals. It was filled with ordinary people, trying to avoid becoming victims of them. If cowboys weren't gunslingers and outlaws weren't legends, surely the sheriff was the one keeping order. The fearless lawman, always ready for a shootout. In truth, most sheriffs spent far more time on paperwork than gunfights, collecting taxes, settling property disputes, even licensing dogs. Many towns didn't even want an armed sheriff wandering around looking for trouble. They wanted someone boring, someone predictable, someone who kept the peace by keeping things quiet. Now picture the saloon, Hollywood's favorite backdrop, swinging doors, piano music, and a brawl breaking out every 10 minutes. Real saloons were less about violence and more about community, a place to trade news, play cards, and rest after weeks on the trail. And the frontier itself looked nothing like the movies show. It wasn't a world of lone white cowboys riding into the sunset. Historians estimate that roughly 1 in 4 cowboys was black or Mexican. Their skill on horseback helped shape the very culture of the American ranch. Native American nations, too, were not simply background scenery for a Hollywood plot. They were sovereign peoples, navigating a rapidly changing and often devastating world. And women on the frontier weren't just waiting in doorways for a hero to arrive. They ran ranches, managed businesses, and built entire towns from nothing. So what really ended the Wild West? It wasn't a final shootout. It was something far quieter. Railroads, barbed wire, and the slow arrival of law and order. By the 1890s, the frontier that once felt endless was already disappearing. Telegraph lines connected towns instantly. Railroads carried people faster than any horse ever could. The open range, the very thing cowboys spent their lives crossing, was being fenced off, acre by acre. Fewer cattle drives, fewer open trails. The job that once defined the frontier was quietly fading away. Towns that once relied on saloons and cattle traders started building schools, churches, banks, real institutions for a settled society. And so, the era we call the Wild West didn't end with a final gunfight. It ended quietly, with paperwork, fences, and progress. So why does the myth still feel so real? Because a good story doesn't need to be true. It just needs to be told often enough. The real Wild West wasn't less interesting than the legend. It was just different, harder, quieter, and far more human. So the next time you watch a Western, remember what you now know. The dust was real. The hard work was real. But the legend was mostly Hollywood. If this changed the way you see the Wild West, there's a lot more history hiding behind the myths we grew up with. Subscribe for more stories where history and legend finally meet.